When mercy costs everything. December snow fell soft outside the cabin. Inside, firelight painted shadows on log walls where an old man sat with his grandson, about to tell a story that would change how that young man saw the world. Garrett Wade was 78 now. White hair, white beard, hands that trembled slightly when he lifted his coffee cup. But his eyes still held the clarity of a man who had spent most of his life reading tracks in wilderness, measuring danger in the set of a shoulder, the placement of a boot. His grandson James sat across from him, 19 years old and lost. The boy had left Harvard 3 months into his first year, unable to reconcile what professors taught with what his heart told him. Now he was here in this mountain cabin in northern Arizona, seeking something he could not name. "Grandfather," James said, voice uncertain in the quiet, "I don't know what I should do. The professors say I must follow the law. My parents want me in business, but nothing feels right." Garrett looked into the fire for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years and choices made in the space between right and safe. "Have you ever had to choose between what's right and what's easy, between conscience and law?" James shook his head. "I'll tell you about the summer of 1882. I was 58. I met a woman named Sarah Brennan and had to answer a question that's followed me ever since." He paused, letting the fire crackle. "What does a man owe a stranger, and when doing right might cost you everything you have?" James leaned forward, firelight catching his young face. Garrett's eyes went distant, seeing across 20 years into heat and dust and blood. It was July. Hot as hell itself. I was checking my trap lines near Marble Canyon when I heard something. A voice. Weak. Breaking. "Don't. It still hurts there." The old man's voice shifted, dropping into memory, and the cabin seemed to fade as the story took hold. "What time?" July 1882. Northern Arizona Territory. The heat came up from the ground like something alive. 7 in the morning and already 95 degrees. By noon it would climb past 110, turning the high desert into a furnace that killed the unwary and punished the careless. Garrett Wade moved through the landscape like part of it. Tall, broad across the shoulders, wearing buckskin shirt, dark with sweat, and trousers of tanned deerskin. Moccasins in the Ute style, quiet on stone. A Henry rifle 44-40 in his hands, a hunting knife 10 inches long on his belt, and a possibles bag that held flint steel and the small necessities that kept a man alive in country that did not forgive mistakes. He was checking his beaver trap line along a creek that ran when winter snow melted high up in the mountains. This time of year, it was mostly dry, just pools in the deep places where willows grew and animals came to drink. That's when he saw the tracks. Boot prints, not moccasins. 2 men. Recent. 8 to 10 hours old, judged by the way dust had settled in the depressions and how the edges had not yet crumbled in the morning heat. Something else. Drag marks. Garrett knelt, reading the earth the way educated men read books. Someone had been pulled. No dragged. Heels cutting furrows in the dirt body weight, leaving a smear where knees had scraped stone. Blood. Drops of it dried to dark brown. 6 to 8 hours old, he estimated, from the color and the way flies had worked it. Not much blood, not arterial spray or the heavy flow of a mortal wound, but enough to matter. He found fabric caught on sagebrush. Cotton. Good quality. A woman's dress torn. Garrett's jaw tightened. He knew what these signs meant, had seen it before, hoped never to see it again. He followed the trail 200 yards through tall grass and around scattered juniper. The sun climbed higher, heat pressed down like a physical weight. Then he saw her. A woman lying face down in grass the color of old straw. Her dress torn at the shoulder and along one thigh. Dark bruising on her upper arm's handprint, shaped the kind that came from being gripped hard enough to leave marks that lasted days. Blood had dried on her leg. The kind of blood and the placement of it told a story Garrett had learned to read in his years on the frontier. Internal injuries, tearing, violence of a particular kind that made his stomach turn and his fist clench. She was breathing, shallow, lips cracked from dehydration, body flinching at sounds she was too exhausted to fully register. "Don't," she whispered, voice like paper crumpling. "It still hurts there." Garrett froze 6 feet away, reading her fear. She thought he was one of them. Come back to finish what they'd started. He made himself small, made himself slow, knelt where she could see him without him looming over her. kept his hands visible, empty away from weapons. "My name is Garrett Wade," he said, voice low and steady. "I live up in the mountains. I'm not here to hurt you." She did not respond, her body tense, preparing for pain. He measured the situation with the cold calculation of a man who had survived 5 decades in hard country. She needed water soon. 4 to 6 hours in this heat without it, and she would die of dehydration. The injuries needed cleaning. Infection would set in fast in the heat. Blood drew flies, flies carried disease. Whoever had done this might come back. Helping her meant making enemies of men cruel enough to leave a woman to die in the wilderness. Walking away meant living with one more ghost, one more face in dreams, one more moment when he'd chosen safety over right. He'd made that choice before. Winter of 1864. A Ute woman. He still saw her face every night before sleep took him. Not again. "I have water," Garrett said, pulling his canteen from his belt. "I'm going to set it here." He placed it 3 feet from her in reach. "Then I'm going to back away. You take it when you're ready." He waited. 5 minutes. Didn't move. Let her see he meant what he said. Finally, her hand crept out. Fingers trembling. She grasped the canteen, pulled it close, drank in desperate gulps. "Easy," Garrett said quietly. "Not too fast. Make yourself sick." She slowed. Water ran down her chin. Some of the wild panic left her eyes. Garrett looked at the sun climbing. Heat building. "I need to get you out of this heat. You won't last till noon out here, but I won't touch you unless you say I can." She stared at him, searching his face for the lies she'd been taught to expect. "You," her voice broke. Tried again. "You won't." "No," Garrett said, flat and certain. "I will never do that to you." Something in his tone reached her. She nodded once, barely. Garrett stood slowly. "I'm going to make something to carry you. Won't take long." He moved into the trees, cut 2 aspen poles 8 feet long with his knife. Used his own blanket to stretch between them, creating a travois, a kind of sling that could be pulled. Padded it with pine boughs to cushion the ride. "I'm going to lift you now," he said, returning. "Tell me if I'm hurting you. Tell me if you want me to stop." She nodded, teeth clenched. He lifted her the only way he could. One arm under her shoulders, one under her knees, never letting his hands wander. Never touching where touch would become violation. She was lighter than she should have been. All bone and muscle with nothing extra. Someone who had not eaten right in a long time. He settled her on the travois, gentle as laying down a child. She bit back a cry when her weight shifted. Pain flared across her face. "I know," Garrett said, and the sadness in his voice was old and deep. "I know it hurts." Yeah, well, the journey back to his cabin took 3 hours. 4 miles. Uphill. Through ponderosa pine forest where the shade brought the temperature down to bearable and the smell of pine needles made breathing easier. Garrett pulled the travois steady and slow. He chose his route with care, kept to shaded ground where possible, stopped every 30 minutes to let her drink, watched the trail behind them for signs of pursuit. At one point, he found Mormon tea growing wild and showed her how to chew the leaves. Natural painkiller, not much but something. She watched him, every movement, every choice, still measuring, still waiting for the moment when he would stop being what he seemed and become what she'd learned to expect. "My name is Sarah," she said finally, voice still weak but steadier than before. "Sarah is a good name," Garrett replied. "Means princess in Hebrew." She made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. "I'm not a princess." "Maybe not," Garrett said, "but you deserve to be treated like a person. That's not negotiable." They climbed higher, the air cooled. Mountains rose around them, ponderosa pine giving way to Douglas fir and patches of aspen that would turn gold come September. His cabin sat at 8,400 feet tucked into the mountainside where a spring fed year-round water and stone cliffs provided shelter from winter wind. It was built of ponderosa logs chinked with mud and moss. One room 16 by 20 feet. A loft for sleeping reached by a ladder. Stone fireplace made of river rock. Shutters on the window that faced east. A door of split logs that could be barred from inside. Defensible, remote, safe. Garrett carried Sarah inside and settled her on a pallet of blankets near the fireplace. Set water within reach. Then stepped back, giving her space the way you'd give space to a wounded animal learning that not every human meant harm. He looked around the cabin, seeing it through her eyes. His gear hung from wall pegs. 3 rifles. The Henry 4440 he carried, a Sharps 50 for long range, an old Hawken 54 that had been his father's, traps hanging from rafters, beaver, marten, fox, dried meat in one corner, venison and elk, a bearskin on the floor, rough furniture he'd built himself. The loft where he slept was accessed by a ladder. Up there, his bedroll, his personal things, the few possessions he'd accumulated in 58 years of living. The rules here are simple, Garrett said, washing his hands in a basin by the door. He spoke with his back to her, giving her the dignity of not being watched. Door is never locked. You want to leave, you leave. I sleep in the loft. You sleep down here. I don't come down at night unless you call. I don't touch you. You need something, you tell me. I'll put it where you can reach it. You want me gone, I go. No questions. He heard her shift on the pallet. When he turned, she was staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. Confusion, suspicion, something else underneath. Why would you trust me? She asked. Don't need to trust you, Garrett replied. Just need to respect you. That's simpler. Night came, the temperature dropped. Garrett lit a small fire, made coffee, strong and bitter, the way he liked it. Left Johnny cakes and dried elk jerky on the table where Sarah could reach them when she felt ready to eat. She slept in pieces, waking with sharp cries, hands flying up to protect herself, eyes wild in firelight until she remembered where she was. Each time Garrett stayed in the loft, spoke softly from above. You're safe. I'm here. No one can touch you. His voice became her anchor, the one constant in darkness when dreams tried to pull her back to the grass and the heat in the hands that had hurt her. Morning came, gray light through the window. Garrett woke before dawn made noise so she would know where he was. Started the fire, made coffee, left food on the table, then went outside to work, checking trap lines, chopping wood, maintaining the spring that fed his water supply, always within earshot, always aware. By the second day, Sarah was moving more. Still hurting, but the body's need to heal was stronger than fear's command to stay frozen. Garrett treated her injuries with her permission at every step. Boiled water, made tea from willow bark that acted as natural antiseptic, applied poultices of yarrow leaves and pine pitch that would prevent infection, changed dressings twice a day, explained each step before he did it. She watched him with the intensity of someone learning that not all men were the same, that some followed rules even when no one was watching to enforce them. On the third day, she asked to help. He gave her a pan of beans and a dull knife. If you feel up to it, trim the bad spots. We'll make stew tonight. It was not about stew. It was about giving her proof that she had value beyond what had been done to her, that she could contribute, that her hands could do things other than defend. She sorted beans slowly, carefully, and when evening came, she had a small pile of trimmed vegetables and something in her face that had not been there that morning. Purpose that evening as fire burned low and coffee cooled in tin cups, Sarah finally told him about the man who had done this. His name is William Brennan, she said, voice steady now. My stepfather. Garrett's face did not change. He waited. He owns the lumber mill in Disappointment, the general store, employs 40 men, goes to church every Sunday. Everyone respects him. And at home, Garrett asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah's voice went flat. At home, he's a devil. Garrett nodded slowly. He'd known men like this. Pillars of the community who built walls of respectability and did their evil where no one would look. People will believe him, Sarah whispered. Not me. Maybe, Garrett said, but you being safe doesn't depend on what they believe. It depends on what I'm willing to do. She looked at him, then really looked, and saw something that made her believe him. On the fourth morning, Garrett found tracks near the spring. He knelt studying them with the focus of a man whose life had often depended on reading signs others missed. Fresh horse tracks, 8 to 10 hours old, boot prints beside them. Size 10 worn heel on the right side. Distinctive. Someone he could track anywhere now. Horse droppings still moist in the center. Bay or brown horse well fed. The kind a man with money would own. A cigarette butt, hand-rolled. Premium tobacco, not the cheap stuff working men smoked. The man had stood here for 20 minutes, watching the cabin, measuring, planning. They knew she was here. The only question now was when they would come for her. Garrett walked back to the cabin and found Sarah awake, already sensing something was wrong. I need to go down to the settlement, he said. Learn about the man I'm dealing with. You can stay here, or you can come with me. Your choice. She went pale. Don't leave me. Then you come. He spent an hour teaching her to observe. Look at hands, not faces. Hands tell the truth about a man. Always know where the exits are, windows, doors, back ways. If I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back. He gave her his backup knife, 4 inches of steel in a leather sheath. Last resort, if there's no other choice. She took it, fingers closing around the handle, and he saw her straighten slightly. Armed was better than helpless. They rode down the mountain as the sun climbed, Sarah on a gentle mare, Garrett on his big roan gelding. 2 riders descending through pine forest toward the settlement, men called Disappointment, a name that seemed more appropriate with each passing year. Halfway down, Garrett spotted them. 2 riders 400 yards to the east, paralleling their route, not hiding, not approaching, just watching. He did not tell Sarah immediately, did not want her to panic. But he adjusted their route, chose open ground, where ambush would be difficult, and kept his rifle across his saddle where he could bring it up fast if needed. Stone Creek Trading Post sat in a small hollow where 3 trails met, population maybe 30. A trading post run by Thomas and Martha Gray, an elderly couple who had been here since the territorial days. A blacksmith shed, a small stable, 5 or 6 other buildings scattered around. Inside the trading post, the smell of leather and coffee and tobacco. Goods stacked on shelves. Flour, salt, ammunition traps, the tools of frontier life. Martha Gray stood behind the counter, 70 years old, with kind eyes and hands that had seen hard work. She smiled when Garrett entered, then her eyes found Sarah and the smile faded slightly. She saw the bruises, the way the girl moved, the fear. Garrett bought supplies, coffee, ammunition for his Henry Salt, counting out coins with deliberate slowness, aware of every person in the store, every sound outside. The door opened, a man walked in, thick-built, 5'10", scarred knuckles. Good boots, expensive. Gun belt with a Colt 45 worn easy on his hip. His face hardened the moment he saw Sarah. That's Sarah Brennan, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. William's girl. She ran off. Silence fell in the store. People stopped what they were doing. Garrett did not turn, finished counting his coins, put them on the counter. Then he looked at the man with eyes that had seen too much violence to be impressed by displays of it. She's not property, Garrett said quietly. The man stepped closer. Mr. Brennan wants her home. Now. She doesn't want to go. The man Fletcher reached for Sarah's arm. Garrett moved. 3 seconds. That's all it took. He intercepted Fletcher's wrist with his left hand, applied a basic wrist lock that forced the man off balance, delivered a short right punch to the solar plexus that took wind without breaking bones, pushed Fletcher backward into a barrel of crackers that cracked and spilled. Fletcher hit the ground gasping. Garrett had not drawn a weapon, had not raised his voice, just acted efficient and final. Bootsteps at the door. A man in his mid-30s wearing a deputy's badge stood there. Average height, worn Remington 44 on his hip. Tired eyes that said he'd seen too much and lacked the strength to keep caring. Problem here, Deputy Cole Hadley asked. Fletcher struggled up, pointing. This man assaulted me. He's got William's property, and he just attacked me. Garrett stayed calm. Man reached for someone who didn't want to be reached for. I stopped him. Hadley looked at Sarah, saw the bruises fading but still visible under her torn and mended dress. His face tightened. Miss, Hadley said carefully, you want to go with Fletcher? Sarah's voice came out small but clear. No. Long pause. Hadley's internal conflict played across his face like weather. Then she doesn't go. Fletcher stood furious. William will hear about this. I'm sure he will, Hadley said. He looked at Garrett. You're Garrett Wade, the mountain man. Garrett nodded. You're making enemies. Wasn't my intent, Garrett replied, but I won't change what I'm doing. Hadley's voice dropped low. William Brennan is my brother-in-law, married to my wife's sister. He's respected, powerful, employs half this territory. Respected doesn't mean right. Hadley turned away, unable to make promises he might not keep. Just be careful. Outside, Martha Gray followed them, pretending to sweep the porch. When no one else was close, she spoke quietly. Williams had been looking for 3 days. He's not himself. Angry, dangerous. What do people say about Sarah? Garrett asked. Martha glanced around. That she's ungrateful. Ran away. Some say worse things. But Thomas and I, we've seen bruises before. We know what they mean. Will you testify? Martha's face filled with sadness. We're old. The store is all we have. William could destroy us. Garrett understood. Fear was the chain that bound good people to silence. They rode back toward the mountain as afternoon heat peaked. Sarah finally spoke. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then he began to speak, and his voice carried weight that made Sarah stop breathing. In 1864, I was an Army scout. Winter campaign against the Ute bands. We raided a village. I saw a soldier assaulting a Ute woman in a supply tent. She was crying. I stood outside, followed orders, didn't interfere. He paused, staring at the trail ahead. Next morning, that woman killed herself, cut her wrists with a broken arrow point. I found her. Sarah listened, frozen in her saddle. I've thought about her every day for 18 years. I didn't save her because I was afraid to break ranks. I followed the law, followed orders, and an innocent person died. He met Sarah's eyes. I won't make that mistake again. Sarah understood then. He was not saving her. He was trying to save himself from the ghost that had haunted him for nearly 2 decades. They reached the cabin at dusk, found a note pinned to the door with a hunting knife. The handle was staghorn. Distinctive, expensive. A rich man's knife. The note was written in an educated hand on good paper. Mr. Wade, my stepdaughter is unwell and requires care I can provide. Return her by Sunday noon to Disappointment Settlement. We will speak as civilized men. Refuse, and I will bring lawful authority and righteous citizens. You will lose everything you have. Signed, William Brennan. Sunday was 2 days away. Garrett read the note. His face went hard as stone. Sarah watched him, fear rising again. She started. No, Garrett said. I won't hand you over, but we need a plan. That night by firelight, Garrett began teaching Sarah to shoot. He brought down his Henry rifle, showed her how to hold it, how to sight, how to breathe and squeeze instead of jerk. You won't become a sharp shooter in 2 days, he said, but 16 rounds at close range changes the equation. Sarah's first shot knocked her back. She missed the target by 3 feet. Good, Garrett said. You didn't flinch before pulling the trigger. That's half the battle. They practiced until dark. By the time stars came out, Sarah was hitting the pine stump 25 yards away more often than not. She lowered the rifle, hands no longer shaking when she held it. Something had changed in her face. Some of the victim had burned away, leaving someone harder underneath. If they come, she said, I'll fight too. Garrett looked at her and nodded. I know you will. The night deepened. They sat by the fire drinking coffee, both aware that Sunday was coming, and with it a reckoning that would test everything they had become in these few short days. Garrett had made a choice, to stand between Sarah and the man who had hurt her, to risk everything for someone he barely knew. But as he looked at her across the firelight, he understood something fundamental. This was not about Sarah Brennan. This was about Garrett Wade, about the man he had been and the man he wanted to be, about the Ute woman who had died because he'd done nothing, about all the small moments when good men chose silence and let evil flourish. He had been that man once. He would not be that man again. Outside the mountain, night sang with wind through pine. Somewhere down below in a settlement called Disappointment, a man named William Brennan was gathering his forces, planning, preparing to take back what he believed was his. Sunday would come, and when it did, the mountain would give up its secrets, and 2 people would walk into daylight to face the judgment of a town that had chosen comfort over truth for far too long. Sarah cleaned the rifle one more time before sleep. Garrett watched her work, methodical and careful, and felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Not that they would win. The odds were against them, but that she had found something worth fighting for. Herself, when good men must act. The 5th day began before dawn. Garrett woke to the sound of Sarah moving below, quiet but purposeful. Not the jerky movements of someone startled from nightmare. Something else, determination. He descended the ladder slowly, giving her time to hear him coming. She stood by the window, Henry rifle in her hands, checking the load with movements he had taught her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Don't want to sleep," she replied. "Want to be ready." Garrett nodded. He understood. Sleep meant vulnerability. Sleep meant dreams that pulled you back to places you never wanted to go again. Better to stay alert. Better to keep moving. He built up the fire-made coffee, the ritual of morning, small acts of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. "Today we train harder," he said. Sarah looked at him, rifle still in her hands. Good. They spent the morning in systematic preparation. Garrett had survived 5 decades in hard country by understanding that hope was not a strategy. Planning was. Practice was. Readiness was the difference between living and dying. He took Sarah to a clearing 50 yards from the cabin, set up targets at various distances, pine stumps, rocks painted with clay, a piece of canvas stretched between two trees. "Yesterday you learned to hit what you're aiming at," Garrett said. "Today you learn to hit it under pressure." He made her load the rifle while he counted, made her fire while he shouted, made her reload with her hands shaking from exertion, made her shoot while moving, while kneeling, while her heart was pounding and sweat ran into her eyes. At first she struggled, missed more than she hit, fumbled the reload, but she did not quit. By mid-morning she was hitting the canvas target 8 times out of 10. By noon she could reload in under 15 seconds, even with trembling hands. "You won't be a sharpshooter," Garrett said, watching her chamber another round, "but you'll make anyone think twice before coming at you. That's the point." They moved on to other skills. Tracking. Garrett showed her how to read the age of prints by the crispness of the edges. Fresh tracks had sharp definition. Old tracks crumbled and blurred. How spacing between prints told you if something was walking, trotting, or running. "Tracks don't lie," he said, kneeling beside a deer trail. "People do. Trust what the ground tells you." He taught her to find water, follow animal trails downhill, look for the greenest vegetation in dry country. Taste rock seeps carefully, watching where animals drank first. He showed her how to start fire without matches. Flint and steel. It took Sarah 20 minutes of striking sparks before one caught in the char cloth and she could blow it into flame. When the small fire blazed, she looked up at Garrett with pride in her eyes. "Why are you teaching me all this?" she asked. Garrett's answer came without hesitation. "Because I can't protect you forever. But I can teach you to protect yourself. That's real freedom. Not depending on someone else to keep you safe. Being able to keep yourself safe." Sarah absorbed this, nodded slowly. Something shifted in her expression. She was beginning to understand that survival was not about being rescued. It was about becoming someone who could not be broken. That afternoon, while Sarah practiced her tracking, reading the signs Garrett had left for her to find, he fortified the cabin. He used an auger to drill firing ports through the log walls, 2 inches wide, angled to cover different approaches. From inside, a rifle barrel could protrude and command the ground outside while the shooter stayed protected. He stacked firewood inside the cabin. Not just for heat, the logs would stop bullets. Create a barrier between flesh and lead. He filled every container with water. The spring was 50 yards away. If they were pinned down, they would need water inside. He checked his ammunition. 200 rounds for the Henry 44-40, 50 rounds for the Sharps 50, 100 rounds for the old Hawken 54. His Colt .45 revolver held 6 rounds with another 30 in his belt. Enough for a war. He hoped it would not come to that. Hoped and prepared anyway, because hope without preparation was just wishful thinking. Evening came. The air cooled. They sat on the porch eating venison stew and cornbread, watching the valley below turn purple with shadow. "Tell me about him," Garrett said quietly. Sarah knew who he meant. She had been waiting for this question, dreading it, needing to say it out loud to someone who would listen without judgment. She began to speak. Her father, Michael Brennan, had died when she was 14. Logging accident. A widowmaker, they called it. A dead tree that hung in the branches until it fell without warning. It had crushed him instantly. One moment alive, next moment gone. Her mother, Catherine, had been left with a daughter to raise and no income. In the frontier territories, a woman alone had few options. none of them good. William Brennan had been her father's business partner. He owned the lumber mill. When Michael died, William had been kind, respectful, patient. He courted Catherine with the manners of a gentleman, brought flowers, quoted scripture, spoke of duty and honor in taking care of Michael's family as Michael would have wanted. They married 6 months after the funeral. Sarah was 17, her mother was 38. It seemed like the answer to prayer: security, respectability, a roof over their heads, and food on the table. For 2 years, it was fine. William provided well, a decent house. Sarah worked in the general store, keeping books, learning the business. Her mother seemed happy. Seemed. Then Catherine got pregnant. At 41, it was dangerous. Everyone knew it. But she glowed with hope. A new beginning. A child to love. The baby came early, a boy, stillborn, the cord wrapped around his neck. Catherine hemorrhaged. The doctor could not stop the bleeding. She died 3 hours after the baby, her hand in Sarah's, whispering apologies for leaving her alone. That was 1879. Sarah was 20 years old, suddenly alone in a house with a man who was not her father and who looked at her differently now that her mother was gone. The change happened gradually. A frog in water that heats so slowly it does not realize it's boiling until too late. Month 1. William was grieving, distant, locked in his room at night. Sarah thought he was processing loss the way people did. Month 2, he became controlling. Don't go out alone, people will talk. You're a young woman without a chaperone. I have a reputation to protect. Month 3, he slapped her. She had talked back about something small. The price of flour. He hit her hard enough to knock her down, then apologized. Said grief made him angry, said it would not happen again. Month 4, he came to her room at night, said her mother would want her to care for him, said she owed him for taking her in when she was 14, said things that made Sarah's skin crawl, but that she could not refuse because where would she go? Who would believe her? The assault began. Regular, brutal, accompanied by words that made it seem like duty, like obligation, like she should be grateful. When she tried to resist, he beat her. When she cried, he beat her harder. When she went silent and still, he seemed to enjoy it more. Month 6, she tried to tell someone. The Reverend. Reverend Parker listened, face grave, then said, "You're confused by grief. Mr. Brennan is a good man. These accusations are serious. Are you sure you're not misremembering?" No one would help. No one wanted to believe that William Brennan, pillar of the community church, deacon, employer of 40 men, was capable of evil. Sarah learned to survive, learned to predict his moods, learned to be invisible, learned that screaming did nothing because no one would come. 6 months ago, she tried to escape, saved $30 from her store work, planned to take the stage to Flagstaff, start over. William discovered the hidden money, dragged her back from the stage stop, locked her in the cellar for 5 days with no food and a bucket for waste. When he finally let her out, the town's reaction was sympathy for William. Poor man, his stepdaughter is troubled, running away like that. He's so patient with her. The beatings got worse. William started drinking more. His control was slipping. He began talking about having her committed, getting legal papers drawn up. Dr. Henderson came to examine her, found her hysterical, wrote a report that said she was a danger to herself, needed institutional care. William was building a cage of law and respectability. Soon she would be locked away in a territorial asylum where she could scream all she wanted and no one would hear. 6 days ago, William came home drunk, angry about something at the mill. He beat her worse than ever before. She thought he was going to kill her. When he finally passed out, she ran, took a horse, rode into the night with no plan except to get away or die trying. 20 miles out, the horse threw her in the dark. She hit hard, injured her hip and leg, could not walk. William and Fletcher tracked her, found her at dawn, and they did to her what men do when they have power and no conscience. When they were done, Fletcher said, "Tell everyone she ran off with some drifter. Nobody's gonna believe a crazy girl anyway." They left her to die in the sun, figured the heat and the injuries would finish what they started. But Garrett found her instead. Sarah finished talking. Her voice had gone flat somewhere in the middle, the way voices do when the only way to speak horror is to strip all emotion from it. Garrett sat silent for a long time. The stars came out. An owl called from the pines. Finally, he spoke. Before you told me his name, I thought about killing him, Garrett said quietly. Now that you've told me everything I know, I will if I have to, and I'll sleep fine after. Sarah looked at him, saw he meant it, saw there was no anger in his face. Just cold assessment, a man who had done math and reached a conclusion. But I learned something a long time ago, Garrett continued. Killing him doesn't fix what happened to you. Only you can do that. I can give you the space and time to heal. I can stand between you and him. But the real fight, the one that matters, that's yours. What if I can't win it? Sarah whispered. You already started winning, Garrett replied. You're here, you're alive, you're learning to fight back. That's more than most people manage. They sat in comfortable silence. Then Sarah asked the question she had been holding since the trading post. You said you were an army deserter. What happened? Garrett looked up at the stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 18 years. Winter of 1864, I was 40 years old, working as an Army scout. Civilian contractor, but that distinction didn't matter much when it came to orders. He paused, organizing memories he tried not to visit too often. The Army was running campaigns against the Southern Ute bands. Policy was forced relocation to reservations. Most of the Utes wanted to keep living the way they always had, moving with the seasons, hunting, trading, free. Sarah listened, sensing the story mattered in ways she did not yet understand. I'd been scouting for the Army for 10 years. Good pay, respected work. I was good at it, could track anything. Read country like a book. The officers relied on me. His voice went harder. That winter, we raided a Ute camp near the Animas River. It was supposed to be a strategic target, warriors who'd been raiding supply lines. But when we got there, it was mostly women, children, old men. The warriors were out hunting. He stopped, started again. The soldiers went through that camp like locusts, took what they wanted, burned the rest. I saw things that made me sick, but I told myself I was just a scout, not my place to interfere with Army discipline. The next words came hard. I was walking past a supply tent when I heard crying. A woman's voice. I looked inside and saw a soldier. Private named Collins. He had a Ute woman pinned down. She was fighting, but he was bigger, stronger. He looked at me, dared me to do something. Sarah stopped breathing. I walked away, told myself it wasn't my business. I was civilian, couldn't interfere with Army matters. I followed the rules and I walked away. His hands clenched. Next morning I found her. She cut her wrists with a piece of broken arrow point, bled out during the night. Maybe 20 years old. Someone's daughter, someone's wife maybe. Dead because I was too much of a coward to do what was right. He looked at Sarah. That's when I knew I couldn't do it anymore. 3 days later I left. Didn't ask permission. Didn't wait for discharge. Just walked away in the middle of a blizzard. And Marshall Carter, Sarah asked. I was trying to reach Durango, get lost in town until I could figure out what to do next. But the storm hit hard. I got turned around, nearly froze to death. He smiled slightly at the memory. Nathan Carter was a deputy marshal then. Found me half dead in a snowdrift. Took me back to his barn, wrapped me in blankets, fed me, saved my life. But you were a deserter. Why would he help? 2 days after he found me, an Army patrol came through. Captain Ellis, looking for deserters. Nathan hid me in a root cellar under his barn, told the captain he'd found a frozen trapper, showed them a grave he'd dug, said the man died of exposure, even showed them a body. Sarah's eyes widened. He lied to the Army. He did. And when the patrol left, Nathan came down to the cellar and said something I never forgot. He said, I've heard stories about what happened in that campaign, what some of those soldiers did. The Army's covering it up. Sometimes the law is wrong. Good men have to know when to step aside. Garrett's voice filled with respect. He risked his career. Could have gone to prison for harboring a deserter, but he did it anyway because he believed it was right. I owe him my life twice. Once for saving me from freezing. Once for saving me from a noose. Will he help us now? Sarah asked. I don't know. He's a U.S. Marshal now, based out of Durango. That's 150 miles north. I haven't contacted him in 18 years. But you will back at him. If I have to, Garrett said, if there's no other way. They sat in silence after that, two people carrying ghosts, finding in each other a strange kind of redemption. The sixth day, Saturday, dawned clear and hot. Garrett was up early checking the perimeter. That's when he saw them. 5 riders visible on the lower trail, 800 yards away, sitting their horses, watching the cabin, not hiding, not approaching, just watching. The message was clear. We know where you are. We're coming. Sarah came to stand beside him, saw the riders. Her breath caught. They want you scared, Garrett said quietly. Don't give them that. But fear was not so easily controlled. Sarah's hands shook as she loaded the Henry rifle. Garrett saw it and did not tell her to stop shaking. Fear was useful. It kept you alert. He spent the morning completing his fortifications. The firing ports were done. He tested angles of fire, made sure he could cover every approach. He strung tripwires 50 yards out, tin cans attached. Any man trying to sneak up at night would announce himself. He scattered dry leaves on the most likely paths. Noise was an early warning system. He dug a shallow channel from the spring toward the cabin. If they were besieged, he could divert water closer. Sarah watched him work, learning, absorbing. This was survival, not heroics, just careful preparation by a man who understood that details mattered. Around noon, a rider appeared at the tree line, alone, hands visible. Thomas Gray from the trading post. Garrett met him halfway, rifle ready, but not raised. Garrett, Thomas said, voice strained, I have to tell you something. Speak. Williams put up a bounty, $100 for information leading to Sarah's return, alive. Garrett's jaw tightened. $100 was 3 months' wages for a working man. In a drought year when crops failed and work was scarce, that was a fortune. Folks going to collect? Garrett asked. Thomas looked miserable. Drought hit hard this year. Cattle dying. People desperate. William employs half the territory. They can't afford to cross him. Some remember the help you've given over the years. Some don't want to get involved. But that money, he trailed off. But Martha and I, Thomas said firmly, we won't say nothing. You've been fair to us. That counts for something. Thank you, Garrett said. That means more than you know. After Thomas rode away, Sarah spoke from the cabin doorway. We're alone, aren't we? Mostly, Garrett replied, but alone doesn't mean beaten. That evening, as the sun dropped toward the western peaks, Garrett saw smoke signals rising from disappointment. 3 fires, spaced signals. William was gathering men, making his move. Tomorrow was Sunday, the day of the ultimatum. At 11 that night, the tin cans rattled. Garrett was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. 3 men coming from the east. Sarah, get to the loft, rifle loaded. Yes, her voice was steady, afraid but functional. Garrett took position at the firing port, the sharps. 50 was loaded, heavy rifle, long range, could punch through a tree at 500 yards. A voice called from the darkness. Wait, send the girl out. Fletcher, Garrett recognized the voice. He stayed silent, did not reveal his position. We'll burn you out, old man. A torch arced through the darkness, landed on the sod roof. The thick grass and earth did not catch fire easily. The torch sputtered. Garrett aimed at the torch and fired. The sharps boomed like thunder in the mountain night. The 50 caliber round hit the torch dead center, extinguishing it. The same bullet grazed a man's arm. Screaming erupted. Return fire. 5 or 6 shots crashed into the cabin. Bullets thunked into logs. One shattered the window, sending glass flying. From the loft, Sarah fired. The Henry rifle's lever action rattled. She fired 3 shots rapid. Did not hit anyone, but forced them to cover. Good, Garrett shouted. Keep them down. He reloaded the sharps. 45 seconds. Too long in a gunfight, but the rifle's power was worth it. Sarah fired 4 more rounds, spacing her shots, making each one count. Garrett finished loading, aimed carefully, fired. The bullet hit Fletcher in the leg. Not fatal, not meant to be, but it took him out of the fight. Fletcher's scream was raw and animal. His men dragged him back into the darkness. You can't hold forever, Wade, Fletcher shouted, voice ragged with pain. Don't need forever, Garrett called back. Just need to make you think twice about coming back. Silence. Then the sound of horses retreating. But as they left, Fletcher's voice echoed one last time through the dark. Tomorrow noon, disappointment. Williams bringing 20 men the judge in the law. You're done. The silence after was deeper than before. Garrett stood at the firing port, breathing steady, assessing. Then he felt warmth spreading down his left side. He looked down, blood soaking his shirt. A ricochet from the window. Bullet had grazed his shoulder, not deep, but bleeding steady. Sarah was down the ladder seeing the blood. I've had worse, he said through gritted teeth. Get cloth. She did not freeze, did not panic, moved with purpose, cut his shirt away with the knife he'd given her, boiled water, added whiskey from his supply. This will hurt, she warned. I know. She cleaned the wound. The bullet had gone through the meat of his shoulder. Missed bone, missed major blood vessels. Painful but survivable. She packed it with clean cloth, bound it tight. Her hands were steady. This was the woman she was becoming. Not helpless, not paralyzed by crisis. Someone who acted when action was needed. You did good, Garrett said, watching her work. You taught me. When the wound was dressed, they sat by the fire, both exhausted, both aware that the raid had been a probe, testing defenses, learning what they faced. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, William would not send boys in the dark. He would come with law and witnesses and the weight of civilized society. They're coming at noon, Sarah said. To disappointment. I know. What do we do? Garrett was silent for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would determine everything that followed. We go to them. Sarah stared. That's what they want. Exactly, which is why they won't expect us to do it on our terms. We don't wait for them to come here. We walk into town, into daylight, in front of everyone. That takes courage. You've got courage, Garrett said. You just needed someone to tell you so. Before dawn, they heard a horse approaching. Garrett grabbed his rifle, moved to the window. Recognized the rider, Deputy Cole Hadley. Alone, hands empty, no weapon drawn. Garrett met him outside. Why are you here? Hadley looked exhausted, a man at the end of something. Because I'm done lying to myself, he explained quickly. William had met with Judge Norton, had legal commitment papers signed by Dr. Henderson, papers that said Sarah was insane, needed institutional care, gave William legal custody and authority. He's got it all arranged, Hadley said. You show up at noon, you're interfering with a lawful custody. I'll have to arrest you. Then why tell me? Hadley's voice broke slightly. Because I have daughters. If someone did to them what William did to Sarah, I'd want someone to stand up. He paused. I can't help you. I have a family, a job, but I can deliver a message to anyone you want. Garrett moved quickly, found paper and charcoal, wrote in the gray pre-dawn light. Marshal Nathan Carter Durango. It's Garrett, Wade, winter of '78. You saved me in snow, lied to Army. I never forgot. I'm calling in the debt. Come to Disappointment, Arizona Territory Monday morning. A woman needs law that still believes in justice. If you can't come, telegraph Territorial Governor about William Brennan. Signed G.W. He folded it tight, handed it to Hadley. That's 150 miles, Hadley said. Even if I ride straight through, even if he gets the message, he can't be here before Monday afternoon at earliest. I know, Garrett said, but he'll come if he can. Hadley took the letter, looked at it like it weighed more than paper should. Then he rode into the darkness. Sarah came to stand beside Garrett. What if he doesn't come? Garrett checked the loads in his rifles. Then we make our stand anyway. Sometimes doing right means standing alone. They prepared as the sun rose. Garrett packed the Henry for Sarah, the Sharps for himself. His Colt is backup. 100 rounds of ammunition, canteens, bandages. Sarah dressed in clean clothes, tied her hair back, washed her face. She wanted to look dignified, not a victim, a person. Garrett watched her and saw the transformation complete. 6 days ago, she'd been broken in the grass waiting to die. Now she stood straight, ready to face the man who'd hurt her, ready to claim her own voice. If this goes wrong, Sarah said as they mounted their horses, thank you for giving me my life back. You gave yourself your life back, Garrett replied. I just held the door open. They rode down the mountain as the sun climbed, heading toward disappointment, toward judgment, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the cabin stood empty and waiting. a place where a broken woman had learned to be strong, where an old man had finally kept the promise he'd made 18 years too late to a Ute woman whose name he never learned. Ahead, a town waited. And in that town, a man who believed his money and position put him above consequences. Today, he would learn different. Today, two people who had nothing left to lose would walk into the light and dare the world to look away. When justice requires sacrifice. Sunday morning arrived with heat that promised worse to come. The air hung still and heavy, the kind of weather that made men short-tempered and animals seek shade. A day for reckoning. Garrett and Sarah rode down from the mountain as the sun climbed two figures against an immense landscape. The trail descended through ponderosa pine that gave way to juniper and pinon, then to high desert scattered with sage and stone. 12 miles from cabin to settlement, 4 hours at a careful pace. They were not alone. Garrett spotted the watchers at mile 5. 3 riders 400 yards to the east keeping pace, not hiding, not approaching, shadowing them like wolves tracking wounded prey. "They're following," Sarah said quietly. "Let them follow," Garrett replied. "We're not hiding anymore." The trail wound through country Garrett knew intimately. Every draw, every ridge, every place where a man could make a stand if needed. He had chosen this route deliberately. Open ground where ambush was difficult. High points where he could see trouble coming. Sarah rode straight back, the Henry rifle across her saddle. 6 days ago, she could barely sit a horse. Now she moved with the rifle like it was part of her. Not comfortable yet, but competent. That was enough. As they descended, Garrett watched her from the corner of his eye. Something had changed in her face. The victim was gone. In her place rode someone harder, someone who had looked at what broke her and decided to break it back. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm thinking about all the times I was silent, all the times I let fear win. I'm thinking I'm done with that." "Fear's not your enemy," Garrett said. "Fear keeps you alive. It's panic that kills. You know the difference now." She nodded. He had taught her that. Fear sharpened senses, made you careful. Panic made you stupid. The trick was riding the edge between them. They crossed Disappointment Creek dry except for stagnant pools where mosquitoes bred. Another 2 miles and they could see the settlement. Low buildings the color of dust. A white church steeple rising above the rest. Smoke from cooking fires. And people. Lots of people. "He's made it a show," Garrett observed. Sarah's hands tightened on the reins. This was it. The moment she had been dreading and preparing for. Walk into that town and face the man who had hurt her, in front of everyone who had chosen not to see. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good, Hebit." Garrett looked at her. "Keep breathing. Look at people's faces, not their feet. You belong there as much as anyone, more. You're the one with truth on your side." They rode into Disappointment at 11 in the morning. The entire settlement had gathered. Every man, woman, and child standing in the street, sitting on porches, watching from windows. William had orchestrated this perfectly. Public theater designed to showcase his authority and her helplessness. The church stood at the end of Main Street, white paint peeling in the heat. On the steps like a stage set, William had arranged his players. William Brennan himself stood highest. 47 years old, handsome in a weathered way, dressed in a good suit despite the heat. Clean-shaven, concerned expression carefully crafted. Every inch the respected citizen. The good man wronged by circumstances. Beside him, Reverend Joseph Parker, 55, balding, holding a Bible like a shield, looking uncomfortable but present, moral authority on display. Judge Samuel Norton stood slightly apart. 60 years old, territorial, circuit judge, papers in his hand, legal authority embodied. Deputy Cole Hadley and 8 armed men formed a loose semicircle. Physical authority, the threat of violence wrapped in the legitimacy of badges. Fletcher leaned on a crutch, leg bandaged. Hatred burned in his eyes. He wanted blood, wanted revenge for the bullet in his leg and the humiliation of being driven off by an old man and a girl. The crowd numbered at least 60. Miners, ranch hands, store owners, women in their Sunday dresses despite the heat, children clinging to parents, all watching and all waiting to see what would happen. Garrett and Sarah rode slowly down the street. Every eye tracked them. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. That's her. Poor William. She looks different than I thought. She doesn't look crazy. They stopped 30 feet from the church steps, dismounted slowly. Garrett kept Sarah on his right side, not hidden but protected, his body between her and William. The silence stretched. Heat shimmered off the packed earth. A dog barked somewhere. Someone coughed. Then William moved. He descended the church steps with arms slightly open, a father welcoming a lost child. His voice when he spoke was pitched to carry, warm, concerned, breaking with emotion. Sarah, my dear child, thank God you're safe. He took 2 more steps, stopped, looked at Garrett with an expression of pain tolerance. This man took advantage of your grief, your confusion after losing your mother. I've been so worried, but you're home now. Let's go home together, get you the help you need. He was good. Garrett had to give him that. The performance was flawless. Every word calculated, every gesture designed to paint himself as the loving guardian and Sarah as the troubled girl who needed saving. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Poor William, such patience, such devotion. Sarah stood frozen. This was the moment. Speak or be silenced forever. Garrett did not speak for her, did not move. This was her fight, her voice to find. Sarah stepped forward, 1 step, then another. Her voice when it came was shaking but audible. I am not your child. I am 23 years old. I am not confused. William's smile stayed fixed, patient. Sweetheart, you've been through trauma. This man has filled your head with ideas. Dr. Henderson examined you. He said you were suffering from hysteria, from delusions. These are medical facts. Dr. Henderson examined me once, Sarah said, voice strengthening. 3 years ago, after my mother died, he never saw the scars. Scars from what? Someone in the crowd called. Sarah's hands went to her shawl. She pulled it down. Bruises fading now to yellow and green marked her shoulders. Old scars, white and ridged, ran along her upper back. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Women covered their mouths. Men looked away. These are from 7 days ago, Sarah said. When he beat me for trying to leave, Fletcher held me down. Judge Norton stepped forward, uncomfortable, but bound by the role he'd been given. He held up papers. Miss Brennan, I have medical assessments, signed by Dr. Henderson. They state you suffer from hysteria and delusions requiring institutional care. Your stepfather has legal custody and authority to commit you for treatment. The words fell like stones. Legal. Official. The weight of law and medicine combined to say she was the problem. Then a voice cut through from the crowd. No, he doesn't. Martha Gray stepped forward, 70 years old, thin as wire, hands shaking but voice steady. She'd been sitting on the porch of the general store. Now she walked into the street like she was walking into fire. William, she said, you told everyone Sarah's mother was your legal wife, that Sarah was your stepdaughter under your legal custody. The crowd listened confused, waiting. Martha's voice grew stronger. But I was at that wedding, 1876. You married Catherine Brennan. She was a widow with a daughter from her first marriage to Michael Brennan. You never legally adopted Sarah. When Catherine died, Sarah became a ward of the county, not your daughter, not under your custody. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Norton looked at his papers with new eyes. Mr. Brennan, is this true? The commitment papers list you as legal guardian? Did you represent yourself falsely? William's mask slipped, just for a second, a flash of rage before the concerned expression returned. It's a technicality, he said smoothly. I raised her. I provided for her. I have moral custody, if not legal. You told Reverend Parker you'd adopted her legally, Martha said. Her fear was visible now, but she kept speaking. You told Judge Norton you had guardianship papers. Both statements were lies. The commitment papers are based on false representation. The crowd's murmur changed tone, less sympathy, more uncertainty, seeds of doubt taking root. William's voice cooled. Mrs. Gray, you're an old woman with failing memory. These accusations are serious. My memory's fine, Martha shot back. I remember that wedding clear as yesterday. I remember Catherine telling me she was glad you were willing to take on a stepdaughter you had no legal obligation to. Those were her exact words. Judge Norton's face had gone stony. Mr. Brennan, if these papers were obtained through false pretense, they are void. This is irrelevant, William snapped. Control was slipping. Sarah is clearly unwell. This man Wade is a known criminal, an army deserter. He kidnapped her, filled her head with lies. Garrett spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I found Sarah crawling in the dirt with blood dried on her legs, left to die in the sun. I didn't kidnap her. I saved her life. Lies. William's voice rose. You have no proof. I have proof. Another voice. Another woman stepping from the crowd. Hannah Pierce, 32 years old, a settler's wife. Worn face that had seen hard years. She held a letter in her hand. Paper yellowed with age. William, you remember my sister, Ruth Callahan. She worked in your house in 1879, right after Catherine died. William's face went pale. She left suddenly, Hannah continued, told no one why. I didn't find out until 3 years ago when she was dying in Denver. Childbirth. Before she died, she told me what you did, how you forced yourself on her, how you paid her $200 and threatened to ruin her if she ever spoke. She held up the letter. She wrote it all down. Detailed account, dated and signed. I have it here. Judge Norton took the letter, began reading. His face grew progressively grimmer. The crowd was shifting now. The careful stage William had set was crumbling. People were looking at him differently, seeing cracks in the respectable facade. 2 more women stepped forward. Elizabeth Morgan, 28. He touched me inappropriately in 1877. I was 17 working in his store. I told no one because who would believe me? Abigail Stern, 35. My sister, 1875. He assaulted her. We were too afraid to speak. He was too powerful. The dam was breaking. Reverend Parker stepped back from William. Physical distance, moral distance. William, is any of this true? William's mask was gone now. Pure rage replaced the concerned father. They're lying, all of them, ungrateful. Scheming. He took a step towards Sarah. You destroyed everything. His hand dropped to his belt. Garrett saw it a split second before it happened. William wore a gun, Colt 45, hidden under his coat. Sarah, Garrett moved. William drew, faster than Garrett expected for a man who played gentleman. Time elongated. Garrett's choices compressed into an instant. Block the shot with his body. Draw his own weapon. Push Sarah down. He chose. Garrett stepped between William and Sarah, pushed her hard to the ground. William's gun roared. The bullet took Garrett in the chest. 2 inches left of center. Missed his heart, but punched through his lung. He felt the impact, the breath leaving him, the ground tilting, Sarah screaming. No! Garrett fell to one knee. His hand found his Colt. Muscle memory, 5 decades of survival instinct. Drew, aimed, fired, 1 shot. Center mass. William Brennan took the bullet through the heart. He dropped his gun, looked down at the blood spreading across his white shirt, then up at Sarah with confusion on his face. I saved you, he said, voice fading. Gave you everything. Why pay? Sarah stood over him, no satisfaction in her face, just exhaustion. You gave me nothing but fear, and he showed me how to beat it. William fell, tried to speak again, couldn't. Died with that confusion still in his eyes. Never understanding, never seeing what he'd been. The street erupted in chaos, people shouting, running, Deputy Hadley pushing through the crowd. Everyone saw, Hadley shouted. Self-defense, Wade didn't draw first. Garrett coughed, blood in his mouth. He was on his back now, didn't remember falling. Sarah was beside him, hands on his chest, trying to stop the bleeding. Stay with me, she begged. Please, you can't die. You taught me to live. You have to see what I become. Dr. Morrison pushed through, old man capable hands. Get him inside. Now, then, they carried Garrett into the general store, laid him on a table. Morrison worked fast, cut away the shirt, found the wound. Bullet went through, missed the heart, hit the lung. He looked at Garrett's gray face. Touch and go. Sarah would not leave. Held Garrett's hand, talked to him through the surgery, through the hours after when fever took him and he wandered in memories and pain. Outside, Judge Norton addressed the crowd. The commitment papers are void. William Brennan lied to obtain them. Sarah Brennan is a free adult with no guardian. He looked at Fletcher and the armed men. Anyone dispute this? Silence. The shooting was witnessed by 60 people. Self-defense. No charges against Garrett Wade. Deputy Hadley stepped forward, removed his badge, set it on a barrel. His voice carried, "I've been a coward. I knew what William was. Did nothing because of family. Because I was afraid. I failed Sarah. I failed this town." He looked at the badge. "I'm resigning. You deserve better." Judge Norton picked up the badge, held it out to Hadley. "Your honesty now matters. Don't throw away the chance to do better." Hadley stared at the badge, then slowly took it back. "Then I'll do better, starting now." Late that afternoon, another rider appeared, dust rising fast. The rider pulled up hard, Marshal Nathan Carter, 52, badge on his chest, face weathered by years of hard duty. He took one look at the scene, the body covered with a sheet, the crowd dispersing, the blood in the street. "I'm late," he said. Judge Norton explained what had happened. Carter looked toward the general store where Garrett was fighting for life. "That's Garrett Wade, old friend. Saved me once. Glad he's still breathing." He turned to the crowd. "Anyone got a problem with how this went down, take it up with me. Wade's under federal protection now." No one spoke. The fight was over. By evening, Garrett's fever had broken. He would live. Morrison said the lung would heal, slowly, painfully, but it would heal. Sarah sat beside him as consciousness returned. His eyes found hers in the dim light. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it," she corrected. "No." His voice was weak but certain. "You stood up. You spoke. That was you." 3 days later, Garrett was strong enough to sit up. A week after that, he could walk, slowly, holding his side. But walking, Sarah stayed in disappointment. Judge Norton helped her recover her mother's inheritance. William had hidden it, claimed it was tied up in business investments. It wasn't. $2,200, enough to start over. She bought the old saloon building, began converting it. Garrett watched from a chair on the porch of the boarding house where he was recovering. Watched her direct workers, make decisions, move through the world like someone who owned her own life. Marshal Carter visited before heading back to Durango. "That was a hell of a thing you did," he said to Garrett. "Owed someone a debt," Garrett replied. 18 years old. "The Ute woman," Garrett nodded. "You can't save everyone," Carter said. "Sometimes the best you can do is save someone." "I know, but I had to try my—" Carter stood to leave, paused. "That letter you sent about winter of '78. I want you to know something. I never regretted what I did. Lying to that captain, hiding you. Some laws deserve to be broken. Some rules exist to be challenged. You taught me that by having the courage to walk away from something wrong." He put out his hand. Garrett shook it. "We're even now," Carter said. "No more debts between us, just respect." After Carter left, Sarah came to sit beside Garrett. "The building will be ready in 3 months," she said. "I'm calling it the Catherine House, after my mother." "She'd be proud," Garrett said. "I'm going to take in women. The ones with nowhere else to go. The ones like I was. Teach them what you taught me. Reading, numbers, how to shoot, how to survive." "That's good work." Sarah looked at him. "Will you check on us sometimes?" "When you need me. And when I don't need you." Garrett smiled. "Then I'll visit anyway. Friends do that." She smiled back. Not romance, something deeper, respect born from shared trauma and mutual salvation. 6 months passed. Winter came to the high country. Snow fell soft on the cabin where Garrett had returned after he healed. The mountains suited him. Always had. He was too old to change now, too set in his ways. But once a month, he rode down to Disappointment, brought supplies, venison, ammunition for the women who were learning to shoot. The Catherine House had 4 residents now. Women between 19 and 35, all escaping situations similar to Sarah's, all learning that the world could be different than what they'd known. Sarah taught them reading, bookkeeping, self-reliance, and once a week Garrett came and taught them to shoot. Not because he wanted them to kill, because he wanted them to know they could defend themselves, that they did not have to depend on men for protection, that they could be their own guardians. On a cold December day in 1882, 6 months after the confrontation, Garrett sat on the porch of the Catherine house with Sarah. They drank coffee, watched a young woman named Rebecca practice her shooting in the yard. Rebecca was 19, fresh bruises still fading on her face when she'd arrived. Now she was hitting the target 7 times out of 10. "She's getting good," Garrett observed. "They all are," Sarah said with pride. "Word's spreading. 3 more women coming next month. You're making a difference. We are. You started this. Giving me a choice when I had none." Garrett shook his head. "No, you made the choice. I just held the door." Rebecca hit the target 3 more times, smiled, her first real smile since arriving. Sarah watched her. "There are more women like I was, trapped, afraid. I'm going to find them. You need help, send word." "Always." Garrett stood. His shoulder still ached when it rained. Probably always would. Small price. He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, rode toward the mountains as the winter sun sank low. Behind him, Sarah stood watching. Beside her, Rebecca. And inside, 3 more women learning to be strong. The cabin waited. The mountains called. An old man rode home to continue the quiet life he'd built. But now, when he closed his eyes at night, the Ute woman's face was softer, forgiving, because he had finally done right. 18 years late, but done. In the mountains of northern Arizona, there was a cabin where lost souls went to learn strength. And if you asked around, disappointment people would tell you, don't go looking for trouble. But if trouble finds you, pray Garrett Wade finds you first. Or pray you find your way to the Catherine house, where a woman named Sarah Brennan teaches that survival is not about being rescued. It's about learning you cannot be broken. That was the story. That was the truth. 20 years later, December 1902, the cabin was the same. The man was older. Garrett Wade at 78 sat across from his grandson James, the fire burning low. The story complete. James sat silent, processing, understanding that the story was also a lesson, a question posed across generations. "You killed a man," James said finally. "Yes, but it was right. It was necessary," Garrett replied. "Right and necessary aren't always the same thing, but sometimes they are." He leaned forward. "Law said William had authority over Sarah. Law was wrong. I chose conscience over law. Nearly cost me my life. Would you do it again?" "Every time." James struggled with this. At Harvard, they teach that law is supreme. Follow law and society functions. "Law is made by people," Garrett said. "People make mistakes. Good men know when law fails and conscience must step up. How do I know when to follow law and when to break it?" Garrett's answer was the distilled wisdom of 78 years. Ask yourself this: if I do nothing, who suffers? If I act, what do I risk? If you can live with the consequences of inaction, maybe it's not worth fighting. But if inaction means someone dies, someone suffers, someone stays trapped, then you have your answer. He reached into his pocket, drew out a knife, 4 inches of steel in a worn leather sheath, the knife he'd given Sarah 20 years ago. "Sarah gave this back to me 10 years ago, said she didn't need it anymore, but said someone else might." He handed it to James. "You keep this. Reminder. Sometimes the best thing you can do is give someone the tool to save themselves. Not save them, give them choice." James took the knife, felt its weight. "I understand." "You asked what you owe a stranger," Garrett said. "Answer depends on who you want to be. A man who walks past suffering, or a man who can't sleep after. What about you, grandfather? Do you sleep?" "Better than I did before Sarah, because I finally did the right thing, even if it came 18 years late." James stood. "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for listening. Now what are you going to do about whatever's troubling you?" James squared his shoulders, made his decision. "The right thing, even if it cost me." Garrett nodded, satisfied. "Then you learned what you needed." The next morning, James left. The snow had stopped. He had a long journey ahead, back east, back to the situation he had been running from. But now he had an answer, or at least a framework for finding one. Garrett stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching his grandson ride away. The cabin stood solid behind him, built to last, built to shelter, built by hands that had also pulled triggers and held dying men and taught frightened women to be strong. In disappointment, the Catherine house was still running. Sarah was 53 now, gray in her hair, lines on her face, but eyes still sharp, still taking in women, still teaching them to survive. Over 200 women had passed through in 20 years. Some stayed, some moved on, and all left stronger. That was legacy, not monuments or wealth. Real legacy was measured in lives changed, in choices made when it would have been easier to look away. Garrett finished his coffee, went inside. The fire needed tending, wood needed splitting. Life continued. Simple, quiet, enough. But some nights when the wind was right, he thought he could hear voices. The Ute woman, Sarah, all the others he'd helped or failed to help across 78 years. They were quieter now, gentler, forgiving. Because in the end, the measure of a man was not whether he'd been perfect. It was whether he'd tried. Whether when faced with the choice between right and easy, he'd found the courage to choose right. Even if it cost him everything. Even if it came too late to save everyone. Garrett Wade had made that choice. And 20 years later, he'd pass that knowledge to a young man who would carry it forward into a new century. Some men save lives with violence, some with mercy. Garrett had done both. But the real saving, as he told James, was what Sarah did. She saved herself. She just needed someone to believe she could. And now she was helping others believe the same thing. That was worth more than all the gold in the territories. Worth more than safety or comfort or a life lived in the shadows avoiding hard choices. That was everything. The old man smiled, fed the fire, settled into his chair. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft, quiet, covering the mountain in white. Inside, an old man sat warm, content, knowing he had finally paid a debt 18 years in the making. Knowing that somewhere down the mountain, women were learning to be strong. Knowing that his grandson carried a knife and a lesson that might change another life when the moment came. Knowing that the story was not really about him at all. It was about Sarah and all the women who came after, and all the people who would hear this story and understand that doing right was worth whatever it cost. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything a man could ask for as the snow fell and the fire burned and the long night came.